The Sacramento Kings have now lost 5 straight games as they lose a second straight game to the Portland Trail Blazers, 98-93. And this loss moves the Kings into dead last in the Western Conference, with the Clippers picking up a W. Also, with other results around the league, the Kings are now tied for second to last in the entire NBA with, I believe it's the Indiana Pacers. They're only above the Washington Wizards, who have 5 wins. They're 5-22. Kings are 6-22, so just a half game up on the Wizards. So the lottery odds are trending in the Kings' favor at this point. And it was a game that was actually enjoyable to watch. So not only are the Kings moving up in the lottery odds and picking up some of these losses, but I think they're more enjoyable to watch now than they were earlier in the season. And I think that's because they're less focused on the veterans. That's not to say that some veterans aren't playing and playing big minutes, like you have DeMar. He just continues to rack up big minutes, 35 minutes from him. Of course, Westbrook playing 30 minutes. So you got some veterans playing big minutes, and Schroeder off the bench with 31 minutes. But it's okay to have some veterans playing big minutes. It's just when that's all the team is playing, when it's just vets, guys who have been former All-Stars or very good players who are highly paid and who are expected to win, and then you're not winning, like that is very depressing. And that's what it was early in the season. And you just have so many of these guys where their role isn't just to get out there and be a young, hungry player that's going to give a bunch of effort. Like it's just a fact that older players tend to, I don't want to say give less effort, but obviously they got less in their legs. They're not going to be bouncing around the court and coming up with loose balls unless you're Russell Westbrook. He still does that. But now we kind of get to watch these young players that are diving around the court, especially in like a Dylan Cardwell, getting 5 blocks. And I think it's just more fun to watch. And we're watching a team play with a little bit of purpose. And that purpose is one, player development, which is not something you could say early in the season. You have 3 rookies playing in the rotation for the Kings, in Maxime Renaud getting the start, and Nique Clifford and Dylan Cardwell off the bench. You have Keegan Murray playing 40 minutes. That's a young player that you're invested in that's playing heavy minutes. So just a lot more of these young players that the Kings are invested in that are playing minutes. And the effort that they provide, it's not even about just player development. Like maybe Dylan Cardwell doesn't stick around in the league. I hope he does, and he has been playing very well in these past couple of games and is very fun to watch. But say he doesn't become really anything in the NBA. Well, at least right now, he's giving like a very good effort level, right? The baseline of his effort level is so much higher than the average of what the Kings were putting out there earlier in the season, right? Watching him go out there and play those backup center minutes instead of Drew Eubanks is a lot more enjoyable. So even if it isn't in the name of player development, you just get that fun factor, that effort factor from a guy like Dylan Cardwell or Nique Clifford playing off the bench. And the bench was very fun in this game. They provided a spark. They outscored the Portland bench. It was the Kings starting lineup that really lacked the offensive punch. The bench came out and played extremely well. Of course, the Kings came out and wanted revenge against the Portland team that they felt, of course, that they were robbed against in the last game. And they weren't able to get that revenge. And so, while of course you wanted that win, I think what we saw was still, a satisfactory effort. And I think we can take a lot of good out of this game. I'm just much happier with Doug Christie's rotations and minutes distribution in these past couple of weeks. And some of it is he's just been able to do because of the injuries. And I think without those injuries, it would have been tougher for him to make these decisions. Although, to his credit, he is making a massive decision by benching Malik Monk. And I mean it's hard to kind of watch Malik on the bench because Malik doesn't deserve it. Malik hasn't done anything to put himself in that position where he's sitting on the bench getting 2 straight DNPs. Of course not. But it still is the type of decision that I was hoping Doug Christie would make before the season started that I didn't think he would really have the guts to make. And maybe he wouldn't necessarily have the guts to make it about like a Zach LaVine or a Domantas Sabonis, but he's making it that decision with Malik Monk of reducing his minutes and reducing them entirely, not even playing him at all. And so the minutes distribution is more what I would like to see, geared towards young players, getting them a lot of minutes. And I think the Kings are just so clearly shifting towards player development. And that's what makes me happy because before this season really started, I thought that that's really where the Kings were kind of going to trend, but I wasn't sure because Scott Perry, while it seemed like that's what he was doing, it didn't seem like he was really building a team that wanted to win and go for it in the play-in or playoffs, whatever. Now we kind of have that confirmation because that's clearly the way that they are moving, and they're making certain decisions revolving around playing time or certain guys making sure they don't come back from injury too soon, if you know what I mean. Like Sabonis is going to be out another month, and Levine is out for a little bit here. The Kings are probably like, yeah, you guys can rest up. We don't really need you at this point. This game was a lot different than the last game that the Kings played against the Blazers, where the last one was very much an offensive-minded game from both teams. Not a lot of stops happening. It was a whole lot of offense. This game really the exact opposite. The Blazers were without Jeremy Grant, and because they were without Jeremy Grant, I thought that the Kings may switch up the starting lineup. I mean, I thought they might switch it up anyways, but especially with Jeremy Grant being out, that's less size to worry about from the Blazers, or at least less skilled size. Of course, you're just replacing him with Chris Murray, so that's still size, but it's not someone who is really a big scoring threat that you have to worry about, that you have to put a really good defender on. And so with what we saw in the last game against the Blazers, where Keon Ellis closed the game, where he had a lot of success, I thought we may see him in the starting lineup, or maybe a Nique Clifford. Instead, we went with Precious again, and I didn't think that was a good decision. So while I like Doug Christie's minutes distribution, Precious in the starting lineup again, it's another one of those situations where it's like a Drew Eubanks situation almost. Not quite, but where he starts and then plays 10 minutes, and that's what we saw a ton with Drew Eubanks. 2 straight starts for Precious, and it didn't go well for him in either. He had been playing so well off the bench. He gets inserted to the starting lineup now. He has 0 touch around the rim. I think the spacing in that starting lineup just hurts him a lot. And I think the fit of that starting lineup just doesn't work. I think Precious comes in with the sole focus of defense, but if you can't do anything on offense, then you never get your defense set, so it doesn't even matter. I think that's what we saw early in this one, where the Blazers were able to get out to a 15-2 start, and the Blazers were playing just like they were in the previous game, but the Kings had absolutely 0 offense whatsoever. And the Blazers were doing the right thing. I don't think the Kings were necessarily playing poor offensively. The ball was not stagnant. It was moving. They were running plays. They were actually getting into their offense. But then every time the ball would get kicked out because the Blazers would collapse, then it's Precious sitting out there ready to shoot a 3, or it's DeMar DeRozan in the corner and he was missing badly. The Kings missed quite a few shots really badly. There were air balls in that first half from both teams, multiple from the Kings. The offense and especially the perimeter shooting didn't look good, and Precious just kept getting the ball in his hands, and he didn't know what to do with it. He is a play finisher. He is not a playmaker. He is not Domantas Sabonis. You cannot run the offense through him. There were times where they tried to get the ball into him and have him run a little bit of either dribble handoff or just have him get the ball and distribute from the top. It didn't work at all. Like, that's not the position he needs to be in, and that's why I think he's worked better as the backup 5, as a small ball 5, where he's able to just set screens, roll to the rim, and then the spacing is better. When he's in that starting lineup, there's just not a lot of spacing when it's Russell Westbrook, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, Precious Achiuwa, Maxime Renaud. There's not a lot of spacing. And the Blazers were very good at exploiting that, very good at letting the Kings have a little bit of space on the perimeter and then closing out late to get enough of a contest to bother the Kings shooters. And the Kings started 0 for 9, and Precious was the only guy to score points, to score those first 2 points. He got them at the line, but he was missing a lot around the rim. And with the Kings playing so poorly offensively, it allowed the Blazers to get out. The Kings couldn't really set their defense, and that allowed the Blazers to get off to a quick offensive start. It was when the bench came in that they provided the spark. And I think, just like we've seen the rest of the season, it's just that when the bench comes in, the Kings tend to have more cohesive units. And it's not like a full line change, put 5 guys from the bench in. Sometimes it is, but that's not even really what I'm talking about. I'm just, when the first couple of guys come in off the bench, it just usually makes the Kings have a more balanced lineup, because maybe you're bringing in a little more shooting or a little more size depending on what the starting lineup was at the time. In this one, it was because they brought in a little bit more offense, and that was Dennis Schroeder coming in for Russell Westbrook. And Dennis Schroeder came out and he was having a very good scoring game. And Nique Clifford coming in, he provided a spark on the offensive end and provided some outside shooting and spacing. And then Dylan Cardwell coming in and playing extremely well. It's not a coincidence that Kings players have played better off the bench. Dennis Schroeder has played better off the bench. You could argue Russell Westbrook has played better off the bench. Precious Achiuwa has played better off the bench. And it's because when you have these bench lineups, I think the coaching staff has done a better job of, once they're making substitutions, then they're usually putting together cohesive lineups. Whereas for some reason, we've seen multiple times throughout this season with many different starting lineups where they just won't play cohesive starting lineups. And the starting lineup that we've seen in the past couple of games is not it. The rotation of players that they're playing is fine. The 10-man rotation, well, we don't need Dario Saric, but for the most part, the guys that they're playing are fine. It's just you don't need to start those 5. There are other ways to mix the lineups where I think you have well-balanced lineups for the entirety of the game. But it was Nique Clifford coming off the bench, providing a spark. He was breaking up plays on the defensive end. He was taking Deni Avdija off the dribble with a little size up into the mid-range, knocking down his jumper. He just looked confident, knocked down a 3 that was a little bit lucky, but then he got lucky on some other, unlucky on some other 3-pointers later in the game that kind of rimmed out. So I feel like he deserved it, kind of just rolling around, bouncing in. But he was finishing through contact, and he was also holding up on the defensive end. He has struggled with physicality early in his NBA career, especially on the defensive end. So for him to be able to play through that physicality both on the offensive end and on the defensive end was really encouraging. Last game I pointed out a play where specifically he was guarding Deni Avdija, who is a very physical wing and taller than Nique Clifford and stronger and very skilled and very good at drawing fouls. And Nique Clifford was able to body him up and force a bad shot. In this game, there was a very similar play, and he was able to, I believe he forced a turnover. Avdija lost the ball out of bounds, I believe it was. He was playing with that force and physicality on the defensive end, which I love to see, and finishing through contact on the offensive end. Keegan also provided some offense. He had 8 first quarter points, just like last game when he got off to a quick offensive start. Another quick offensive start for him, getting to his spots, being able to use his body to find angles to finish off the glass, get into that mid-ranger. And then Dennis Schroeder providing offense off the bench. And Dennis Schroeder has been great for the Kings ever since he moved to the bench. I'll continue to say it. He has been such a steady presence offensively off the bench. Even whether he scores 6 points like he did last game or 21 points like he did this game. Both performances were good. It's just, what does the team need at the time? They needed him to score in this one. They didn't need him to score in the last one. In the last one, they just needed him to kind of be the engine that runs the offense. In this one, they needed him to actually score the ball. And that's exactly what he did, 21 points. And then you had Dylan Cardwell coming off the bench, hyping up the crowd after a turnover, knocking the ball away. I mean, he just knocked the ball away out of bounds, and it was still Blazers' ball. And he was getting the crowd involved. Like every little play, he was hyping up the crowd, and that's what you love to see. Someone providing that energy to a fan base that really needs that type of energy. And then Dylan Cardwell hitting a baseline fadeaway to beat the shot clock near the end of the first quarter, which was odd, but worked out. The second quarter was pretty choppy. After the Kings had fallen down 13 in that first quarter, they battled back to get within 2 because of that bench unit. The second quarter was very choppy. 19 points for Portland, 18 for the Kings. So a defensive battle. There were just so many deflections, balls getting knocked out of bounds. Just nothing was clean about the quarter. Every basket was just some guy making a play. You know, Russell Westbrook hitting a bank shot. Russ had some good moments early on in that second quarter, finding Maxime for a floater, drawing a foul. But it really felt on both sides that it was individual plays that was making the offense happen because both defenses were doing pretty well. DeMar was getting after it defensively. He had, I believe, 3 steals in the first half. But it took some tough shot making from guys like Russ, guys like Dennis Schroeder. The ball was just kind of flying all around the court. But to be honest, that's kind of what I want to see from a young team. I'm okay with that type of game being played for the Kings. A defensive battle, that's fine by me, because normally that's what you wouldn't see from the Kings. Normally you wouldn't see the Kings getting into this type of defensive battle. There have been so many 30 plus point quarters for opposing teams against the Kings. That was not the case in the second quarter, because the Kings defense was getting after it. They had Dylan Cardwell, who was a shot blocking machine. We saw a little bit of Dylan Cardwell and Maxime Renault playing together, which I liked. And for a team with a lot of rookies, with a lot of young guys now, finally, we're seeing those young guys play. Finally, I can say that. They have a lot of young guys that they're playing, which is nice. It's not always going to be super clean offensively, and it's going to take those veterans to kind of organize the troops and run some offense and sometimes make some tough shots, but it was the young guys that were staying with it with their defensive effort. And that's what you want to see while they figure it out offensively. The defensive effort is there. In the third quarter, the start of the third quarter was kind of what we saw at the start of the game, where the Kings go with that same starting unit. And again, it didn't work. Again, the Blazers got off to a hot start. So the Kings weren't even holding up defensively with a unit that is kind of, Precious Achiuwa is in there to make that unit a defensive unit, because Keegan and Precious, when they're on the court together, the defensive numbers have been good, but it hasn't worked with the starting lineup here. And the half-court offense was just very rough. It was slow, too much, again, of Precious on the ball. The only bucket early on was a baseline out of bounds play where Keegan cut in and got an and one. But it was a lot of contested shots after one-on-ones from, a DeMar or a Russ. And so again, it had to be the bench that comes in and makes an impact. Nique Clifford came in, and then the Kings started to actually get a couple of good three-point shots. There were a couple of moments where they finally swung the ball around, and Nique got a couple of open ones. He missed them. They went in and out. But finally, the Kings started to have some good offensive possessions, probably because they put Nique Clifford in for Precious Achiuwa, so they finally have another floor spacer out there, even though he did miss those shots. Eventually, he did knock one down in that third quarter, but I thought him coming in for Precious Achiuwa, while it didn't completely fix the offense, it did give the Kings a nice little outlet for, hey, it's another shooter out there. It's not Precious Achiuwa just catching the ball and not being able to shoot. And, I want to make it clear, like, I'm not hating on Precious Achiuwa. I just think he needs to be put in a different spot, in a different lineup, because he's played very well for the Kings in many games. So it's not on him. It's just that the lineup doesn't work. But Dylan Cardwell came in, made an impact again. His screens are very good. He set a pin down for Keegan. Keegan comes around. The Kings set a ton of pin downs, trying to get Keegan to come around on curls. And a lot of times, Keegan gets no space off them. Dylan Cardwell actually set a good screen and got Keegan some space, and Keegan went to a really nice floater. While the offense wasn't great from the Kings, they did manage to get into the bonus very early, like about halfway through the quarter, and they took advantage. They started getting to the free throw line, and it was actually Dylan Cardwell that kind of sparked a 10-2 run for the Kings that got them back into this game. He just tipped a defensive rebound to a teammate and then started screaming, and you could hear him on the broadcast just yelling about just tipping this defensive rebound to his teammate. Then he runs down the court, grabs 2 offensive rebounds, maybe should have gone back up with one of them, but he just provides that energy, the defensive rebounding, the offensive rebounding. The Kings didn't even score on the possession. They had a shot clock violation because one of the offensive rebounds he got didn't hit rim, but you gotta love it. You gotta love the energy that he provides. And then Nique Clifford hit a 3 off of some great ball movement to cap that 10-2 run. But Cardwell was everywhere, protecting the rim, rebounding the ball, and hyping up the crowd. And I love it so much. The bench lineups were just very, very fun to watch. And the Kings got within 3 at the end of that third quarter. Then to start the fourth, it was kind of the Maxime Renault show. He came into the fourth with 3 or 4 points on the game, maybe 4 points. Ended the game with 17 points. I don't know exactly what he started the fourth with, but it was not a lot of points, and he ended with 17. He scored the Kings' first 6 points of that quarter. He was involved in everything. He also had 2 fouls. It wasn't all positive, but he was involved in absolutely everything. His touch wasn't the greatest, but he was going after his own rebounds, getting his own me bounds, and then putting them back in. It was a lot of Russell Westbrook or Dennis Schroeder creating for him in the pick and roll, and he was just living with that little floater. And sometimes he would miss him, but he would be right back there to get his own rebound. And through those three straight, really, Maxime Renaud floaters to start that fourth quarter, the Kings got a short-lived lead of 1 point. But then Denny Avdia responded, creating a lot of offense for the Blazers. And the Kings' offense wasn't really pretty. The only good Kings offense they got was finding Maxime Renaud for his little floaters. That was really it. And Keegan Murray grabbing a defensive rebound and chucking a full court pass up to Max, who then got fouled. But really the only offense was Maxime Renaud. And that's not great. You definitely want more offense from other guys. But the Kings stayed in this game really due to their scrappiness and effort. And it was Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook down the stretch of this game. The effort that he was putting in, he just stayed with every play, with every single ball. There's one play where he passes it, or he tries to pass it out to the perimeter. Ball gets deflected. He stays with it, gets it. Then he goes one-on-one. And Donovan Clingan kind of gets caught ball watching in the middle of the paint. And Maxime Renaud slips to the other side of the paint, the other dunker spot. And Russell Westbrook finds him. And Clingan, he looked like he was stuck in mud. The way that he just was like, he turned his head, but didn't move at all. And Max is just there. The relationship that Russell Westbrook has with Maxime Renaud has been very fun to watch. But Russell Westbrook then got a steal right after that possession into a Maxime Renaud offensive rebound. He tips it out to Dennis Schroeder, who knocks down a three, gets the Kings within one. So the effort on the defensive end was there. The effort just in general going after loose balls was there, but there just was not enough sharpness offensively. And speaking of sharp, Shaedon Sharpe had that poster dunk on Russell Westbrook down the stretch, which was tough. But the Kings didn't get enough scoring out of Keegan Murray down the stretch. He was not hitting. And Keegan again had one pretty much an identical game to the last one, where he starts off hot, gets 8 points, 10 points in the first half, ends with 15. If he can just make one more three or two threes a game, right? He went 0 for 6. It would change everything. But right now he just can't, and he missed a big momentum 3 in the fourth quarter. Well, I don't really expect him to be the biggest fourth quarter scorer. It would be nice for him to get just a bucket here or there down the stretch of some of these games. But then the Kings, who had been doing really well at keeping the Blazers off of the glass, and especially Donovan Clingan throughout the entire game, and had been winning the offensive rebounding battle by quite a lot, and they did end up winning it 18-10 on the game. But down the stretch, Portland very much won the physicality battle. While Maxime Renaud had been doing a very good job of rebounding the basketball for most of the game, it was Donovan Clingan who definitely had the advantage down the stretch. He got an offensive rebound and won, missed the free throw. Kings give up the rebound on that missed free throw. That was a disappointing one, and that was the play that got Maxime Renaud pulled from the game, because he gave up that rebound on the free throw, where it's it's understandable if it's Donovan Clingan, but when Donovan Clingan is the free throw shooter, you got to get the rebound. And they weren't able to get that rebound. Shaedon Sharpe had that poster on Russ to go up 5 with 2 minutes left, and the Kings bring in Dylan Cardwell. So while I understand what the thought process was, you're getting out rebounded, you're losing the physicality battle, I didn't like the move to remove Maxime Renaud, just because Maxime was the only consistent source of offense for the Kings down the stretch of this game in the fourth quarter. The only one. He was having a great offensive quarter. And they pulled him for Dylan Cardwell. I would have been interested to see what if Dylan Cardwell came in there for DeMar DeRozan, right? Because Dennis Schroeder was having a good offensive game. Or maybe you pull Russell Westbrook or something. Pull one of the guards rather than pulling Maxime Renaud and go bigger and see what happens. I would have been interested in that. But Cardwell came in for his physicality. And immediately Dennis Schroeder tries to thread a pocket pass into Cardwell, and Cardwell goes for a floater and misses it badly. And I was just like, what is Schroeder doing? Why is he trying to feed Cardwell there? It's kind of a know your personnel. If that's Max, that's fine, but you shouldn't be feeding Dylan there. And that's kind of the difference, where the Kings could not score down the stretch, and they bring in Dylan Cardwell and take out Maxime Renaud. I didn't love the decision making there. You kind of needed DeMar to carry the offense, or Schroeder to hit some big shots, and they didn't. So I would have liked to see, what if instead of pulling Maxime for Dylan, you put in maybe a Nique Clifford for a Russell Westbrook, or a Nique Clifford for DeMar, or Dylan Cardwell for Russ, or something like that. But instead, you have Klingon blowing by DeMar from the corner. That was a rough one. Like, Klingon is like 7'2" or something, and he just blew right by DeMar for a dunk from the 3-point line. And that was pretty much it, right? 7-point lead. Although, I mean, actually, the Kings had a shot. They had multiple shots. The Blazers do not know how to close a game, apparently, because DeMar hits a three, and then credit to Russell Westbrook especially for just staying with it. The effort that Russ shows, you can never fault him for not giving effort, because he was full court pressing. He forces Shaden Sharp, him and DeMar double team. They force him to throw a bad pass. Dylan Cardwell intercepts. And then Cardwell could have found DeMar under the rim for a layup. Instead, he passes it to Russ for three. Russ clanks that three. And then somehow Russ creates another turnover. And Dylan Cardwell gets fouled, makes one. But, it wasn't enough. Portland makes their free throws down the stretch. Rob Williams knocks both of his down, and that ends the game. So a 5-point loss, 98-93. Going through some of the individual box scores, Precious only played the 10 minutes, and again, he struggled with that starting lineup. I want to see him back off the bench, because you have Dario Saric playing 3 minutes off the bench. Replace Precious with Dario, or no, sorry, replace Dario with Precious off the bench, and put someone else in the starting lineup. Whether that's Keon Ellis, if you want to go smaller, Nique Clifford. You're obviously still small, but there's really no other options. So Nique Clifford or Keon Ellis to start, in my opinion. And then you really don't need Saric in the rotation at all. But then looking at some of the lines here, DeMar had 15 points, 1 for 6 from 3. Of course, the one he hits is late in the game, but he did have 5 steals, which he has been getting a ton of steals lately. He's been very active in the passing lanes, and that's the one thing he can do on defense. Russ went 2 for 10, 7 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals from him. So it needed better offensive performances from those two. They need to be the drivers of the offense in the starting lineup, and they weren't. Instead, it was the bench that was providing the offense. 21 from Schroeder. He's been great, 6 assists. Did have 4 turnovers, but he's been really good driving the offense off the bench. And then the other big offensive performances, Maxime Renaud with 17, most of that in the fourth quarter, 11 rebounds for him. He did have the 5 turnovers and had some bad fouls. So, it was not perfect. I don't expect it to be perfect. Got outmuscled and benched down the stretch, but those are all learning experiences from him. And he still puts in 17 and 11 for a double-double. And then Keegan, 15 points, 6 rebounds, a couple of assists. I did like one play that he had where he drove and was kind of able to make multiple efforts to drive to the rim. Got stopped once, reuse the screen, get downhill, and then look like you're going to shoot and go for a layup, but then find Dylan Cardwell on a pass. So that was a really nice pass. But definitely need him to just knock down a 3 or 2, and his lines will look so much different than they have been. Like 15 points is fine, but like, if you just knock down a couple of threes, all of a sudden that's a 21-point game and things are a lot different. So he just needs to be able to knock down a 3 or 2. And then Dylan Cardwell, 4 points, 2 for 6 from the free throw line. It's definitely not his strong suit. The one thing I would like for him, he got 3 offensive rebounds. If he could just make a couple of those, like go back up and dunk one of them or something like that, like get a little bit of offense for yourself that way, that would be really good. Somehow had the fadeaway from the mid-range. That was a weird one, but had the 5 blocks, 8 rebounds, and was setting good screens, providing good effort, providing good energy for the crowd. I loved it, and really glad that the Kings recalled him from the G League. Speaking of the G League, Devin Carter down there hitting game winners, going for 30 points and massive lines. So he's been playing pretty well, but it's kind of the difference. Dylan Cardwell gets the opportunity because you have 2 injuries to the center position. Devin Carter, even with Zach LaVine out, there's still no opportunity for him to get minutes here. So maybe that'll come later in the season. I would want to see that. But you have the guard that you are investing minutes into is Nique Clifford, 12 points, 5 for 11 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3. I love the volume and confidence of 3-pointers. Like, he was confident walking into those shots. Just in general, he was really confident trying to find his own shots, whether that was off the dribble, getting into the mid-range or catch and shooting from three. The confidence that he was playing with, I loved. And then he was a physical presence on the defensive end, grabbing 5 rebounds, being a physical defender, and we really need that from him. And then the last couple of guys, Keon, 10 minutes, pretty much a Tony Snell line. Zeros across the board except for fouls, which he had 3 of, but it was definitely odd to me. I don't think he had a great first stint, but he was fine throughout the game, and he played really well last game. So it was surprising to me that he only played 10 minutes, especially with Jeremy Grant out. So the Blazers even smaller. No, not even smaller, just smaller. Smaller than they were last game. Still relatively big, but smaller. And then Sarge played 3 minutes. The Kings now play the second night of a back-to-back against the Houston Rockets, so that will be a tough one. They stay at home, so no travel, but Houston Rockets, obviously a very tough team. And the Kings have not played a lot of back-to-backs this season. That will change, and the schedule just gets a lot more congested in January because December is NBA Cup month, and so if you don't go far, you're not playing a ton of games. January's schedule is a lot different than December's, and they also have another back-to-back at the end of December here. So there's going to be a lot of games. They're going to be coming fast, whereas it's been a little bit of a slow trickle here. They've only played, honestly, like, what is it, 7 games in December? Yeah, it's 7 games so far in December, so not a lot. But now the games are going to start coming, and they play against Houston. But the thing I will say is Houston is also on the second night of a back-to-back, so it's even there, and they're having to travel. So Kings kind of have an advantage. But I'm just excited to see Dylan Cardwell get in there against a Houston Rockets team that's going to want to get after it physically and get after it on the offensive glass. That's going to be a challenge for him. I think that's going to be a very, very fun matchup. Dylan Cardwell getting out there playing against those guys. I wouldn't be surprised to see the same exact starting lineup that we saw in these last 2 games just because of the Rockets' size. So you want to keep Precious in there in that sort of lineup. I would understand that. It would be interesting, though, for the Kings to go smaller, put in like a Nique Clifford, and then just try to run really fast. Just try to use your size. I mean, it probably wouldn't work. I'm not saying, going small is going to work. Going big's probably not going to work. Nothing's probably going to work, but it would be interesting to see the Kings try to go small and just outpace this Houston team. But I do think they'll probably stick with Precious just because of the size that Houston has. And I'm just hoping we could see Nique Clifford string a couple of good games together. It's going to be tough against this Rockets defense. I'm also interested to see what Keegan does against a long Rockets defense. He struggled with length a bit this season, but I definitely want to see Nique Clifford string a couple of good offensive games together, see if he can score in double digits in 2 straight games. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back tomorrow to recap that game against the Rockets, so I will see you guys then. Peace.